Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Mandy Hansen. I direct the Global Engagement Office here at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And it's really a pleasure to have you all here on our campus. There's been a lot of growth on our campus. We've just announced our new chancellor, Chancellor Reddy. And I just wanted to share that, our office is a young office. It was just founded in 2012, and it's focused on comprehensive campus internationalization. It's home to a small intensive English program, international student and scholar support, immigration advising, and study abroad, education abroad, and that's where Amanda comes in. We were able to work with her very minimally, but to have her trip registered and support her journey, at least somewhat logistically, on a very basic level. And I really look forward to hearing about her research, and it's a pleasure to have you all here. So I just wanted to give a quick welcome, so thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I will try to keep this brief, but I want to make sure that I do my due diligence with introducing Amanda. I do want to say that Amanda, her PhD program is the same PhD program that I completed last year, so rock on with your bad self. Awesome program. So Amanda Metcalfe has spent 20 years serving the community in community and military counseling. She is currently an instructor and counselor at the United States Air Force Academy and has spent the last 2 years in that awesome PhD program I just mentioned. She has recently focused her research efforts on post-trauma growth and feminist cultural leadership through research, which her travel included going to Cuba, Kurdistan, and Israel to examine culture and empowerment of women making significant global strides in leadership. Amanda, in order to tell this vibrant story of leadership, will feature the professional photography of Matt Raines. Now, if we could all give Amanda a warm applause. Welcome.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, so I want to thank the Global Affairs Council and the World Affairs Council and the Global Engagement Office for making this happen. This is really fun to actually take a lot of hard work, myself and Shireen, and kind of put it into a format that we can share in the United States and here at the university. So one of the things that they really asked us to do when we were over there in Kurdistan, they were really excited about this research. And they asked for their story to be told. So they agreed to these interviews with the caveat that we come back and tell the story right, with the right history and the right focus. So a lot of people, I know myself included, didn't really know where Kurdistan was or what Kurdistan was all about when I started, who were the Kurds. But it all started over a glass of wine and a nice, fresh Cuban cigar. So I just got back from Cuba doing a very parallel study there with the women of Cuba, who were, phenomenal in their own form of leadership. But just talking about Cuba, and this gentleman in the backyard said that I should look into Kurdistan. And I asked him why, and he just said, well, if you're focusing on women, the women over there are really doing some impressive things, and I just got back from Kurdistan. My in-laws are from Kurdistan, and I can introduce you to some people who could get you started in this research. And so I said, okay, I'll go check it out. And I did a little research, and in fact, I was extremely impressed, and I said I have to go over there. And so I booked it within a month. With the global engagement help, we got the IRB rolling really quickly, and off we went. So I went there with a team. It was a small team, but a really good team. From left to right is my cousin Matt. He came with 3 cameras and a drone. Next is Shireen, my soul sister and my partner in this research. A very brilliant woman. I met her in the preliminary stages of this study, and she just said, I want to go with you. This is important, and I can help you. And so she signed up, booked the tickets, and we showed up in Kurdistan about a month or so later from meeting Shireen. And then this is Naisit. She's a woman that we met, and I actually interviewed her daughter. She was She was one of the participants. So you're going to see a lot of pictures of this setting, and this is Kandil. These are the mountains at the border of Iran and Iraq. And the organization that we spend a lot of time with did quite a few, 4 to 5 interviews with women that are associated with this organization in some form, the PKK, and they train in the mountains. So this is kind of a strategic place. This is the new year that they celebrate, and it's called Naros, and they kind of have to move it around each year for safety because it's kind of a targeted area wherever they happen to be celebrating what they happen to be doing. And I'll go more into why they have to kind of move around. All right, I need to go back and I know you guys have been staring at this, but I just really I have to make the geography really clear before you can get a good picture of the research. So Kurdistan is not a country. Kurdistan is a part of 4 different countries. These borders were drawn in 1923. It's called the Lausanne Treaty. They were drawn by French and Britain. So you can see the largest part is Turkey. The safest part, which is where we ended up going, is Iraqi Kurdistan. Small parts of Syria, northern Syria, and then a large chunk is also Iran. So in Iraq is really where there's kind of an autonomous piece of Kurdistan. They have their own government, their own constitution. All the I guess the freedom fighters and the political organizations that are working in Turkey, Syria, and Iran can safely come into Iraq and collaborate, educate, and train. So this worked out really well for us because we were able to meet quite a few of them in this safe zone. These women and men made it very clear that I could not know them without knowing their history. So it's not like I went there and got a big history lesson. We did a lot of interviews, so I had to come back and really kind of educate myself on the history. So I'm going to do the best I can, kind of giving you a really quick glimpse at their history. In order to know their history, you have to understand that this is an ethnicity, and foundations, markers, and goals of ethnicity guide us into knowledge, and knowledge of the differences of culture. So you're going to find out that the ethnicity of the Kurds are quite different from the regions that surround them. They're a very accepting people. Their religions are very diverse, very accepting. Some of the religions that are a part of Kurdistan, very old: Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Agnostic, Yazidi, and Islam. Kurdistan embraces cultures to include the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, the Turkmen, and the Syriac. I don't know if you guys keep up on the Syrian conflict, but the Turkmen have also, as well as the Kurds, been pretty instrumental in the fight against ISIS. There's quite a bit of, this is going back to some of the ancient history, there's a lot of mother goddess symbolism in their history. And almost every woman that I talked to referred to this ancient history. So I mention it because it's an important reference for them in their ideas about leadership. Their ancient and egalitarian cultures date back 5,000 years to a time where there were fewer examples of ownership, very communal society, very ecological-based society. There's been anthropological digs in the area. One's named Jorma. It's a site that's important for revealing traces of one of the world's first village farming communities. They say it's about 7,000 years old. And if you guys can see that it's at the Fertile Crescent. So this is a very old area, but also a very fertile area, strategic for a lot of resources as well. So because of that geography, they were targeted. There was a lot of targets of conquest because of where their land is positioned. Here's where you see the beginnings of the agrarian leadership. So the female leadership really started back in these farming agrarian societies 5,000 years ago. There's an old Kurdish saying, and it's the Kurds have no friends but the mountains. And you can see from the map that they have a lot of enemies that surround them. And dating back to 5,000 years ago, a lot of their mythology discusses the importance of the mountains. Some of their oldest ancient history comes from those mountains. And it's always been a protective force for them. the history of Kurdistan, as you know, has been a very persecuted one, a very oppressed one in the last 100 years. Some of those oppressions include hegemonic assimilation, fundamentalist religion, laws that are persecutory against women, vulnerabilities of war, and genocide. They've been stateless for 100 years. They are in the process of getting a de facto state recognition. This is really important to understand because Kurdistan has made significant strides for state recognition. And I mentioned a few. They have their own government, the Kurdistan Regional Government. They drafted their own constitution. The United States actually helped with this. They have their own economy and their own legal system and several forms of their own military. There's about three or four different militaries that are aligned with different groups in Kurdistan. They're very strategic, very resilient. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'm just going to quickly touch on this flag. I'm going to spend a little bit more time. I mentioned that these are actually Yazidis, but this is Abdullah Öcalan, and he's been really instrumental in the freedom movement ideology. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking about him, but I just wanted to mention him because you're going to see his face on a lot of flags. Okay, so the cultural backdrop is also very important, and how they've been affected in the last 100 years socially and culturally. So I talked already a little bit about the ancient history of female leadership. There's also, they've got a lot of regime influence. So you saw the map, those surrounding areas they consider regimes, we consider regimes. That includes Arab, Turkish, Persian regimes. They've created power relationships within the feudal structures. That's created many problems for the Kurds. It's essentially opened up a vortex where regimes, other than their own culture, brought their own versions of culture and religion into the villages of Kurdistan. So that's where we see a lot of the traditional misunderstandings that are happening still today. This helps to kind of understand the conflict and how close they are to the conflict right now. This is a map. This is an app that was recommended to me by one of the Peshmerga colonels, and it updates me really almost every other hour on what's going on over there. So it really serves a good purpose to kind of keep me in the loop of what's going on in the Syrian conflict, as well as the Kurdish civil war, even with Turkey. So there's not any labels, but I can tell you that the red is Assad. I mean, as much as we can kind of dial it down to labels. Assad. Green is Turkey / the rebel forces, and yellow, the Kurds. And that is the area we call Rojava. You're going to hear me talk about the Rojava model a little bit. So this is land that they've really secured in the last 4 years. They did have to push ISIS out. So ISIS has come in and committed some pretty drastic forms of genocide in this area, but now they've secured it. And of course the black is Daesh. So when I was there, when I first downloaded this app, this area, the black area, was about half what it is right now. And so that was about a month ago. So you can kind of see how critically fast ISIS is kind of moving in, particularly to Iraq. Okay, so I'm just going to touch on the wars also. Let's go back to here. The wars include, I mean, they've seen a lot of wars, but the significant ones for them were the Iraq-Iran war. They lost about 500,000 men. And we all know that women and children become vulnerabilities of those wars, and that's why you see a lot of the persecution that's happening with women over there and some of the persecutory laws that hurt women. Also, they had a bit of a civil war between their two administrations. They've worked things out recently with the help of the United States. But still, when you go there, you can cross borders from KDP to PUK, and the feeling and the culture changes a little bit. And the military changes. So there's a whole different military when you move even, like 50 miles over to one of the administration sites. Okay, this is my favorite part. the freedom movement. This is really what catches everybody's eyes. If you're reading anything about the Kurds, this is really what gets people sparked up. This is what you'll see in the news. So Abdullah Öcalan, the guy on the flag, he is the leader of this movement, and they call his ideology Opeci. Okay, and he's brought a lot of things to the Kurds, but I'm going to kind of narrow it down to three really important things. He brought a different perspective of history to the Kurds. Okay, so the Kurdish history, and they actually told me their history's been written a few times kind of backwards as far as the Western society knows of it. He's bringing the Kurdish version of Kurdistan's history, and he is writing it down from a Turkish prison over the last 10 years, and he is transmitting it to these organizations so that society can really be informed about what's going on in Kurdistan and what their history really looks like outside of what regimes have said their history looks like. He has brought, and of course me doing a feminist study believes this is probably one of the more important things, he has brought feminist consciousness to Kurdistan. So he spends a lot of time talking about the science of women and how important female leadership is in Kurdistan in order for any sort of liberation to occur in Kurdistan. And so fundamentally, his message really starts with women. And, well, I'm going to talk about that a little when we get to some of the interviews. The third thing is he's brought this really, it's kind of unique, but it stems from Marxism, but it's kind of evolved into something a bit more libertarian. They call it libertarian democracy, or it's also referred to as Confederate democracy. Okay, so the way I like to think of it, I like the term Confederate democracy because I can kind of conceptualize it when I think about the United States back when we were starting out with our little Confederate, entities, while Britain was still in control of us, right? So that's essentially what Kurdistan's pulling off, but they need a model to do this. This has been 30 years of work. It's just hit the news in the last 4 years, but these organizations, particularly the PKK, has been working on this ideology and this transmission into society for 30 years. And some of the women that I met have been doing it for about 30 years, which I was completely surprised about. I thought, this freedom movement, it's like a couple years old. Okay, so I touched on a little bit of this already, but it's really important to get a basic understanding of their culture. Recently, hegemonic assimilation has really influenced this movement, more than you might think. Hegemonic assimilation is a forced assimilation done with a heavy hand from many structures that exist within a country, including media, school, military, and religions. Many of the women that I met described strict assimilation in schools growing up. Some quit school because of it. Some became freedom fighters because of it. And some ended up in the United States. I mean, a lot of diaspora occurred at that time because of this assimilation. And Shireen and her family would be an example of that. They just left. So one of the things that one of the women mentioned is, even though this assimilation was hard on them, and they were kind of forced to kind of squash their culture and their language, they said it did allow for them to learn a lot about other religions and other people and other cultures. So I thought it was impressive that they were able to find the upside, because the work that they're doing now, they have to access that acceptance and that understanding of Arabic culture, Turkish culture, because those are the people they're essentially fighting with and working with every day. So just to touch on a few of the events of the assimilation. The Kurds in Turkey have been denied basic citizenship until the 1990s and are locked in a decades-old civil war with Turkey to this day. Syria's Kurds have lived without culture or linguistic freedoms for decades under the Assads. They were not granted full voting rights until the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011. Iraq's Kurds suffered from genocide conducted by Saddam Hussein in the 1980s. So we spent a little time with this, the genocide. The campaigns are known as Anfal and Halabja. I'm sure you guys have heard of at least a Halabja. It was the worst chemical attack that's ever happened in the world. It occurred in Halabja, Kurdistan. The day of was about 3,000 deaths, and the following months were several thousand more. And then the Anfal campaign was just, full-on assassination of Kurds, which were tens of thousands afterwards. This was kind of in a response. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but they would say it's in a response to the Iraq-Iran war, some of the contentions of that border area. So Halabja is right at the border of Iraq and Iran. This is something that you won't read in the news. Hundreds of political imprisonments have ensued in Iran and Turkey. Iran's notorious for executions of Kurds. Turkey's notorious for bombings of Kurds, assassinations and imprisonment of the Kurds, particularly women. The Islamic Republic of Iran ranks first for executions per capita in the world. I think I read a number of about 500 in the last 2 years. Most of them were Kurds. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but if anybody has questions about something they refer to as femicide, that's also occurring in Kurdistan, Turkey, Kurdistan. They've implemented the curfews in the last few years, and it really kind of creates an excuse to imprison and even kill Kurdish women. These curfews only exist in the Kurdish cities of Turkey. Of course, there's the imprisonment of Öcalan himself, which has hurt the Kurds. But he's still doing his work. Okay, so you saw that picture before. That was Sakin Kansas. She was the co-founder of the PKK and the first guerrilla fighter. She was killed in 2015. She was assassinated in Paris along with these other two women who were activists. And since she's been assassinated, they wrote a book about her. You can't write a book about a guerrilla unless they passed. So she, there's going to be a lot more information coming out about her, but she co-founded this ideology that we'll kind of be referring to. And then Leyla Zana, she's a pretty notorious figure, or an important figure in Kurdistan. She hasn't been assassinated, but she was imprisoned for, 5 years. She was in the parliament, and she spoke Kurdish, which is illegal, and they put her in prison. She came out of prison and is still a political figure in Turkey, despite the history. So you can just kind of see, I like this picture because this was at Naros. They're celebrating the New Year, but they also honor Abdullah and also the guerrilla fighters who passed in the last few years, which are quite a few. And then the important thing to remember also is ISIS is significantly targeting women. I mean, they've gone into that Rojava area and enslaved about 3,000 Yazidi women, or actually the northern Kurdistan area or northern Iraq area. So this is just another targeting of women that's happening in Kurdistan. Okay, so the next slide, I just want you to keep these questions in mind. I've already talked to you a little bit about the PKK, but these are the things that I want you to be thinking about as we go for the second half of the show, because I'm going to show you some slides, introduce you to the people, and then talk a little bit about the themes of the research. So the research question is, what intersections really exist between culture and leadership for women in Kurdistan? These are some questions that kind of emerged after I went to Kurdistan. What does the other side of terrorism look like? What is really the freedom movement? What is this all about? And then what's the role of female leadership in liberation for Kurdistan? Just really quickly, because it is research, I got to touch on the methods. Preliminary study was with 7 women in the United States. Kurdistan, 13 women. It's a really good sample, I believe, thanks to the help of Shireen. 4 guerrilla fighters, business owner, student. I had to get a therapist and a social worker, of course, and a couple activists. Yeah, and then the theoretical framework is feminist theory and cross-cultural leadership, since those refer to the research questions. Okay, so I'm going to try to comment as we go through this slideshow, but this is Matt Rains now, okay? And I think it's just important to meet the people. So the women that I'm sitting down with, Shireen and I, are women that we interviewed. You'll see pictures of the PKK and just the Kurdish culture over in the Kandil Mountains. Those are probably the more colorful ones that you're going to see, of the mountains. Really beautiful backdrop. You're going to see a couple men that I interviewed. One's Dr. Kiani. He was actually a parliament member, so he was really informative on kind of the political backdrop of Kurdistan. I think I listened to his interview twice since I got back, just because there's so much to it. I had to go back and listen and take notes. And then you're going to see a Shangalese refugee camp. So Shangal is northern Iraq, mountains. ISIS, Daesh came in, enslaved several thousand, but genocide, wreaked havoc on the villages. They, the YPJ and PKK and the military factions, Peshmerga, they pushed them out, but nevertheless, they're still in a state where, several thousand Shangalese refugees. But Kurdistan itself has about 1.5 refugees that Kurdistan itself is taking care of. That, in my opinion, speaks to the kindness and acceptingness of the Kurds. And they're not just, they're not all Kurds. It's, Syrians, Arabs. So these two women are both guerrilla fighters of about 17 to 20 years in the service. This is Dr. Kiani. This is the camp. 30-year guerrilla, Nadawi. This is the mayor of Halabja. how the slideshow ends, because this scene really kind of demonstrates the way Kurds, and particularly Kurdish women, lead. So you can see in the back there are 3 women. One is a pretty high up commander. They have the scarves. There's 3 of them. You can kind of see their gun propped up against the back of the tent. And if you ask them, they would tell you that it's really, the militia part of what they do, the fighting part of what they do is really not what they want people to hear about. So this is really why they were more willing to tell their story. But this is how they do it. They go door to door, tent to tent. They sit, they have tea, they have lunch, they have tea, they have fruit, they have more tea. But they talk to the people, they talk to the women. So this is really, this was a theme, of course, but this is how they teach the women to lead. It's very societal and communal based, and you see even at the celebrations the women doing it. So I particularly like this slide. So you saw I did 13 interviews, but I have only probably time to tell you quickly about 2. Zara really touched me because of her history, and then what she's doing now is extremely impressive to me. Zara is an Yazidi representative. She escaped ISIS in Shangal. She has no schooling, but her job now is a representative of the Free Yazidi Women's Movement. She also sits on the board member for foreign relations for the Yazidis. She says at least now, with support from the guerrillas and the movement, women can organize, align, and educate each other. So she's taken this on as one of her jobs. After the genocide, she said, as painful as it was, women can now organize, educate, and promote themselves and protect themselves. And I asked her, what did it mean to be a leader? She said it's about responsibility to the society. She said that there's a psychology involved with it, that you have to know the psychology of your community. For her, it's the psychology of the Yazidis. That it's complicated, but you have to take the time to understand them before you can lead them. And it's very much embedded in trust. So Zara was an activist of the movement. So Nusha is kind of on the other side of it. She is the mayor of Halabja. Her themes and leadership are very similar, but her place in society is a little different. She said in Halabja, women have always run society. She describes her leadership as patient and knowledgeable of the people, that it involves a commitment to society and utter honesty. She was a political leader with the PUK, so one of the administrations, and she was a mayor of a small village, and then she moved up to mayor of Halabja, which is a pretty significantly large town. She described this culture as one where women were first to write, act, and teach. This was home of Adila Hun. If you go over there, you hear Adila's name quite a bit. She was one of the first women in the 1920s to dedicate her life to educating women. So she was also the mayor of Halabja. She comes from the ancient culture of Harami, and she describes, when I ask her about her leadership, the first thing she mentions is her ancient culture, that this culture was egalitarian from the beginning, several thousand years ago. She also noted that her election to mayor happened right after an Islamic State presence, and so she had a pretty big job in front of her, because women, the nature of a woman moving into a leadership role after the Islamic State has had a presence is a pretty big charge. Okay, so back to that genealogy, that consciousness that Öcalan teaches about. It's important to remember, and this is one of the things that kind of struck me after I got back from Kurdistan. I think that they were telling me this in their own way, but it kind of became clear when I started looking more into some of Öcalan's writings. you have to remember that radicalization requires clear gender roles. And if we look back in history, we'll see this. Gender stereotyping, silencing of women, marginalizing of women, women being specified into roles, this all contributes to a vortex or an environment where radicalization can occur. And if we look back at Nazi Germany, this is certainly something that happened before that form of genocide happened. Feminist consciousness is consistently seen throughout the interactions with both men and women. This is not something, in fact, the first interactions that I had up there in those mountains were men coming and talking to me about women. I didn't even do the interviews until 3 or 4 days later. The women would grab me and say, "Oh, you're doing leadership research? Let me tell you about women." They're very proud of what's going on, and they're proud of the feminist consciousness, and they're certainly willing and proud to transmit it to whoever's willing to listen. The men would say to me that women must be leaders because they do not care about power. The women would say to me that they were born to be leaders because of their history. I'd just like to point out, I think that their form of consciousness is a bit different than in Western feminist ideology because it's very performative. So they're acting and doing every day with all the people. They do discuss capitalism and nationalism as being aligned with slavery of women, domination, ownership, and systems of control. So you'll see that in the ideology of Confederate democracy, how they're kind of working to eliminate that in the Confederate grassroots form of democracy. And that is happening in Roosevelt. When they discuss liberation of women, again, it comes from a very ancient motivation. They always discuss this ancient motivation. Systems and foundations of rule have always made women vulnerable, so there is a high motivation to kind of stop these structures of power. Öcalan discusses the seizure of economy contributing to the oppression of women, as well as conspicuous fear of dominant gods. Power typically is paired with sexism, and it does not recognize the principles of freedom or equality. These women know what slavery looks like here, and so they are committed to the design of a society where women are equal and the roles are a function of a society of societal care. Just a few more quotes to just kind of give you a picture of what anarcho-feminism looks like, or just the feminist consciousness ideals that they're really educating at the community level. Women's freedom cannot just be assumed once the society has been obtained. General freedom and equity. So the movement really extends beyond freeing their region or freeing their country. So they know they're always going to be working at it. Again, I just want to touch on what women are up against: assimilation, fundamentalist religion, laws that persecute women, war, genocide, patriarchy, and radicalized groups that persecute women. The struggle for women's liberation must remain separate from the fight for nation. Okay, so now we get the research side of this. One of the things that really popped up as I was going through these interviews is a paradox. And this is not a big surprise because paradoxes, occur for women in leadership in general in any country you go to. But theirs is significant in different ways. So when I talk about freedom versus honor is prescribed in a more contemporary way. So they're dealing with how honor has been viewed in Kurdistan via the assimilation and the regimes. So that's the paradox. It's hard to contend with honor and work for freedom. The regimes of war have influenced this paradox, though in 2014 when women started fighting side by side with the PKK and the YPG, the PKK, they just all aligned. It's 50-50 now, and they went into Kobani and they pushed out ISIS, and now all of a sudden it becomes a bit more honorable to be a guerrilla. We saved a lot of women. Imagine that. Politically and socially, there's a paradox. For women, because they do have families and they do have careers, they also have to kind of choose, at least for a short time, sometimes if they go and they operate in the freedom movement, they have to sometimes leave their families for a short time and their careers. So another paradox is activism versus safety. Okay, so for women who are really becoming active, like I said, Iraq's really the only safe place for them. So if they go into Syria or Turkey or Iran, there's a good chance that they could become imprisoned or shot. And this has happened to a lot of women, and I heard a lot of stories of this happening. Imprisonment's, the most common, but. So some of the findings of leadership. So this just talks about the attributes I'm really referring to when I ask women what a good leader looks like to them. This is what they attributed it to. They like altruism. They like a leader that serves, collective consideration, and horizontal leadership. So with the people and for the people. And then since I'm kind of basing this on a theoretical model, I pulled some dimensions from a global study, a very large global study. For the women, I don't know if this would show up for the men, but they kind of speak to this humane-oriented leadership. And I can give you a definition. It's defined as the degree to which the organization or society encourages and rewards individuals for being fair, altruistic, friendly, generous, caring, and kind to others. So you can imagine coming out of the Saddam regime why these characteristics might be important to them, and why they might be so dedicated to them. So when looking at leadership, you can you look at the action and the how. So the what and the how. So as far as action, they're obviously very courageous. We saw those paradoxes. They serve. Probably the most important thing that they do that stood out is they're very dedicated and very strategically to inspiring and empowering worth in women. They really believe that women can't become leaders until they really truly know themselves. That's how they would actually frame it. Women need to know themselves. And this really, for them, as far as I could understand it, meant breaking through some of that regime influence, going back to their roots, and really understanding what they were capable of as women. So we talked about in power versus empower. This is kind of how they phrased it, because power is kind of a dirty word. So I talked to them, like what empower really means, and that's really what they were speaking to in their strategy. Establishing roles in shaping Kurdistan. This is something that they're constantly doing. So you see those women up there speaking. Anytime there's a speaking engagement, there would be a man speaking and a woman speaking. And so they don't just do like me, just kind of shoot from the hip when it comes to speaking. They spend a lot of time working on the strategies of speaking. So every woman who, I guess, gets educated around this ideology is taught how to public speak. A lot of them will play music. They travel around town to town, educating about the ideology, but they're really taught how to connect with society, so how to go into the homes and do social work, essentially. They're extremely organized. You saw that in Zara's notes. She said organization is probably the number one thing, and they really believe that this is important because they weren't able to organize. Organizing women, for the Yazidis particularly, was really hard. And it continues to be hard. They have to spend a lot of time kind of gathering women from the community and educating them. So this is how they do it. They do it from a grassroots level, always focused on society. This is where you see it differ a little bit from the freedom movement versus the politicians. But that's true across, all governments. If it wasn't good for society, they're not going to be doing it. They employ Kurdish culture and history. Always they were talking about the culture and the history. They always mentor. You'd always see women sitting down with younger women and mentoring them. So you saw Nedawi up there, one of the guerrillas. She always had a younger woman with her. She was always teaching her. And then Strategia really speaks to their strategy. And their strategy, this is probably the psychology side. It's teaching the beauty inside, not out. This has to be done a lot with the public. They teach in public speaking, connection, delivery, confidence, skill, and empowerment. So this is really the psychological side of how they do leadership. I just like this picture because it really symbolizes how they lead. That horizontal is also how they dance. And if there were men and the men did dance with us, they would be side by side. Okay, so this is probably going to be my last slide, but it's an important one. So we have our own anarchists. So the theme really is self-determination through culture, and then kind of and you're looking at the intersections, because you saw the leadership themes, but this is really how they connect. Because of their history, because of what they were exposed to, because of that assimilation, because of the regimes that have had so much control over them, they have to do it in an anarchy way, right? They can't just go to the voting booth and figure this out. It's never worked that way, and it probably won't. I mean, according to Öcalan, it really does have to be in an anarchy form. And of course, they're employing feminism into this anarchy. So one of my favorite quotes from Emma Goldman, our own anarchist: anarchy stands for the liberation of the human mind from domination of religion and liberation of the human body, from the coercion of property, liberation from the shackles and restraints of government. It stands for a social order based on the free grouping of individuals. Emma Goldman was kicked out of the United States for talking about birth control. Okay, so I'm just going to end with the resiliency side of it. So you've seen a lot about how the women lead. Overall, this is a very progressive culture, socially very progressive. I believe that they're going to continue to change the face of Kurdistan and really what freedom looks like and means for Kurdistan. They have endured some of the oppressions and atrocities that most cultures have never had to endure, and they are leading despite that. Their resilience and leadership can be seen through those scenes and also through the pictures, I believe. Their practice of leadership is creating solidarity, and it's also drawing attention from within and globally. So because of what they're doing, they're starting to gain a lot of momentum, not just in Kurdistan, not just in the Middle East, but hopefully, in the Western world. Yeah, and they always refer back to their ancient forms of leadership. So that's it. It's 7 o'clock. And of course, I want to open up for questions, but I want to invite Shireen up here because I feel like she's more of an expert, and she brings, a whole lifetime of Kurdish knowledge and Kurdish culture with her. She was there for every interview, every experience. So I hope we can do our best to answer any questions.
Hi everyone, I want to answer if you guys have any questions regarding the trip we did or historically, whatever.
She knows a lot.
No.
What was your favorite part of the trip?
Candil was my favorite part. Yeah. I mean, we stayed in this little village, and we were Shireen and I were sleeping with 15 other women, and I know Matt was laid out with 15 other guys in the other room. And it cracked me up because he had gym shorts on.
Yeah.
And they were like, no. Here's some pajamas, buddy. And so he wore those pajamas the whole trip.
How did the families of these women that decided to be part of the guerrilla team, coming from their faith and their culture, how did they respond to their girls going out and doing that?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of them are disowned. So she was asking about how the families coming from, traditional Kurdish communities, how they respond to the women joining up with the freedom movement. So,
yeah. Because this new Öcalan's ideas, so everybody is going forward because they see this is the solution. Even the families, they want to know more about this. They accepting and they welcoming those guerrillas. They going their houses. So women over there, mostly they want to know more, and there is no sources. And they are a good sources when they come to their house, and they be a good friends, and they welcoming with the other parts of the families, other friends. So they separate,
Yeah.
spread the ideas and the
spread.
things. Yeah.
So the older guerrillas, though, before it was more on, but before it wasn't quite as honorable to be a guerrilla. I mean, a couple women, I guess Parowan was one. Her family disowned her, but it was important. So that was her new family. Kurdistan was her new family. The guerrillas were her new family. But I think for the younger women, it's more easy because it's an important part of their education as women.
Yeah, the Aween story. Maybe that's the good answer. One of the guerrillas, the picture was here. Her name is Aween, and she's from the Rojal part, which is the Irani's Kurdistan. And she was the only girl, and with the 5 brothers. And she just keep answering all her questions. She cannot find it in the culture, and with her 5 brothers, they just keep in here at house, She said, I was looking for my questions, for the answer that I have. I am going to the mosques to answer to the mullahs, the what's called, I don't know.
The religious leaders.
Yeah, the religious leaders. I couldn't find any.
She wanted answers about, women,
women
breaking outside of the 4 walls of their home.
Mm-hmm. And then she said, one of my relatives, they have a connection with this Apochiti, and he told her about what's going on, and she connected with them, and she's happy, and their family is happy about her.
And her dad became an activist.
I have a question about communication across the various Kurdish communities in different countries. Is the Kurdish language pretty much understandable across these various communities? And what is the linguistic root of that language?
It's a very original language, is even before the Greek. The Kurdish, because they are very ancient community, and the language came from women. Women create a community, and she find the language, and the language little by little separate to the Greek, to the other language. Because sometimes I see some English word or Persian word. I know the root is Kurdish. It goes to the Kurdish one, but we have dialectic. It's like a Sorani, Batinani, and Kermanji. It's Loristani. Yeah. So we have many
communities connecting. There's literally millions. They're basically the largest ethnic group outside of the country. So it's not like we have a Facebook page. There's way too big for that. So obviously in Denver, all the families gather around and celebrate those, and or just for the heck of it, go to
No matter where they came from.
Exactly. But
the political country.
right. The 2 main dialects, Sorani and Kermanji, are as different as, I want to say, French and Spanish. In my understanding of words, if the pronunciation might be a little different, but if in writing, it's a lot easier to see the words. But both of them have kind of the same roots. And there's debate as far as which is older. Kermanji has won that in saying that they're the original Kurdish dialect. And Haurani is actually one of the oldest in linguistic studies. Haurani is just a region in northern Iraq. Is the one of the oldest in the world.
John.
I wonder about pay and incentive. Do these women get anything back from the movement in terms of pay, or do they just gotta find their own gun and bring it to the land?
Well, It depends on which group I think that you're talking about. I mean, there's the Iranian group and there's the Iraqi group and Syria and Turkey. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons. I think that's one of the reasons why the State Department looks at them, specifically the BKK, because I think they believe that a lot of their funding might come from Iran. I don't know how true that is.
No.
But when the guerrillas don't get paid, no. I mean, it's a communal way of working. You know, they grow their food. You know, we sat down and had tea with them, and it was homegrown stuff. And when they're older, one of the organizations that we worked with was Rojak. They rely on community funds and donations to survive.
Right.
When the women are busy doing their work, who cares for the children, or how do they arrange care for children?
Most of the guerrillas, they are not married. They are not thinking about their own interest. They just
They're married to Kurdistan.
yeah, they married to Kurdistan. They said this is
That's
the
what
more
they say.
important. Yeah, they're not married.
So the guerrillas, but still, like you see the YPJ groups, anybody can go fight for them. I could fight for them, you could go fight for them. So, you know, we would have to leave our people, you know, and just make arrangements, like if somebody were deployed, essentially. But the guerrillas, that's their life and their work. But they do have space for people who just want to go fight for a year or a few months. They open it up. There's a lot of Westerners over there fighting right now. And the PKK is fighting next to American troops. It's important to remember that. It's important to make that distinction. They are over there right now.
And they are in a terrorist list also.
Oh, they are? Who's terrorist?
I don't know, the PKK.
The PKK is. I thought you were talking about the U.S. The U.S. is gonna be on there soon, I'm sure.
So, what is horizontal leadership?
The horizontal leadership. So that's really the way they described it. So just leading with. So you're down there with your people, asking questions, gathering information, understanding the psychology of the community, the psychology of the culture. You know, the Yazidis was an example. So you're doing it side by side. In anarchy and in this democratic confederalism, by nature, they don't really have anybody who's like their leader. They kind of lead together, side by side. That's really the best way I could describe horizontal leadership.
Is there rank, as in lieutenants and sergeants, et cetera, or it's just everybody?
Well, there's commanders who like set up the strategy, but there's not rank, I wouldn't say.
Just in a political part, there is a range. Otherwise, everybody is working, equal. But depend on the responsibility. Up to person like.
That's a good way to describe it. You basically have a job. You're not in charge of people. This is what your job is. So they do that in the military structure as well. But that woman that was on there, she was a commander because she'd been doing it a long time, so she had to kind of organize and create the strategy to get accomplished whatever they needed to get accomplished. And they have teachers, of course.
They have academic in mountain.
They have academies in the mountains.
Yeah,
you can learn all this if you want to go to the mountains of Iraq and Iran and sit down with the girls. Sure.
You said they took in, or they have about 1.5 million refugees. Do you ever see, or is it common for any of the refugees to join the movement and go with the guerrillas?
Yeah, the Yazidis have their own unit, actually. The Yazidi women, well, these are Yazidi women.
Yeah.
They have their own unit. Yeah, they created their own unit.
And they started out as refugees?
Yeah. Well, refugees, they came out of the mountains. A lot of them just joined straight out of, the villages that were hit.
How are they feeding 1.5 million refugees?
That's a good question. I have no idea.
That's I think
They're making it happen,
UNHCR they help, and Iraqi's government, UNICEF.
Yeah, there's a lot of a lot of the European countries. You saw the UNICEF symbol, so they're contributing.
So I'm curious about financial support too, and I was thinking one way to
gauge that might be like, whose weapons do they have? Are they American weapons? Are they Iranian weapons? Are they Russian weapons? Like, did you happen to notice like the make of the model of their
AK-47. So they're Russian. They're all AKs they're carrying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the Peshmerga had some M14s, I think. I don't know.
Some politic thing, we don't know about it,
Yeah.
it's up to, yeah.
It's a very dynamic region, so cities get conquered, so you basically kill some ISIS, you take their weapons, so wherever they got from, whoever they stole from.
Yeah.
So weapons get passed around, like a tank. There's no serial number, there's no registration. Obviously, the Iraqi army, when ISIS went into Iraq, they just abandoned their post, and all those billions of dollars that we gave the Iraqi army to keep Iraq secure just fell in the hands of ISIS. So, and of course, the Kurds got some of that. So, we recovered much of that weaponry and Humvees.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes.
So I saw a lot of tents. Is that where these ladies are living, in tents?
In the refugee camps, they are tents.
But where do these things?
This is a Nowruz.
Yeah,
This is the Nowruz party in like a New Year, and they came for celebration. That's not, all the Yazidis women is not in the camps. Some, they live in the city, some still in Shangal in their place. So not all the Yazidis is in the camp.
So they've integrated. Some of them are in camps, some of them are in the cities working. They've
Yeah.
integrated into society.
And what kind of jobs do they have? What's a typical job?
Mostly over there, it's like a teachers, like most of that is
Food
that,
service, activists.
Activists.
I mean, it would be like integrating into Colorado Springs, whatever you can kind of grab as a entry-level job. I'm sure that's what they're doing.
So it seems like you use activist kind of synonymous with guerrilla, but they're two different things, right?
They are, but they're following the same ideology. So the activists would be, like Maral was one. She came from Turkey, and she's essentially in charge of educating people about what's going on with women in Turkey. So she's considered an activist. But she also, lives with a couple of guerrillas. So when the guerrillas come into town, that's where they're housed. So you always see them together, really. But the guerrillas are the ones that are going to the mountains and teaching and fighting.
They're getting more orders, just in and out.
Yeah. So that's a really good question. There's women that aren't guerrillas that are still significant in the freedom movement.
Is the goal an independent state? Hasn't been mentioned.
Say that again?
An independent state of Kurdistan. Is that discussed? Or?
Well, the Iraqi portion is semi-autonomous. So they're still under the supervision of Iraq. So everything is a caveat to the Iraqi constitution. But Iraq's given them kind of this autonomous recognition. So they're allowed to have, and this is why they're the safest place for Kurds to kind of go in and operate and kind of do this activism. They have their own government, they have their own parliament, they have their own draft constitution. Whether or not they'll ever become, if it were to ever happen, it would probably be the Iraqi portion. I'll go to the map actually. So the portion that may, you hear talks about it, may at some point get recognition as a state would be this part. The rest, probably not.
Is that the goal? Are they working toward that?
My impression is that the KDP and the PUK, that's kind of their goal.
Yeah, but the PKK, no. PKK, Öcalan, Apache is want to democratic for everybody's equality and the liberal life.
Yeah, so the difference is you're talking about a political structure that like the government, right, in Iraq, and the philosophy, the Öcalan philosophy, this democratic confederalism, is really designed to be stateless,
Federation.
right? Like we were, when we were Confederate states, right? So I think they're thinking ahead, like this might not really ever happen. We might not ever have our own nation, so we need to start thinking about how we're going to rule ourselves. Or not rule ourselves, but how we're going to, create a society that's democratic, that works for everybody, we can take care of everybody. And that's the PKK, the Öcalan ideology, and that's the freedom movement side. So there's a lot of conflict between the government and the freedom movement side, because one's more focused on having a government and the other one is focused on not having a government, non-nationalistic. So that creates some conflicts in itself.
I have a question about the political representation of the Kurds in Turkey. There's the military group and then there's the political group. Is PKK the military group in Turkey?
No.
Well, how do you describe the two different Kurdish groups in Turkey, northern and eastern Turkey?
They are. They're not allowed to really.
Maybe I don't need to know the difference, but they had some representation in the parliament of Turkey. And my question is, after this election that Erdogan had in the redoing of the constitution, trying to make big changes and make it more autocratic, will there be any continued representation of the Kurdish people in the Turkish parliament, or is it gone?
Well, so you're referring to the HDP, and they did get some momentum, but this is where this civil war really comes into play. They made it really hard for that to continue. That's where I was talking about the femicide, Leyla Zena. She was a parliament member. They kicked her off, put her in prison. I mean, a lot of the people who have been voted into some of those positions, for some reason now are in prison. I don't know. So I would say probably they're not going to have much luck.
Yeah, I think the PKK, Öcalan, asked a couple times, many times, the Turkish government to we have some freedom, and we sit together, we live together as a Turkish and Kurdish, and they refused. And that's why they have this HDP, the one is in a parliament, the Demirtas, he's in a prison right now. He said, I'm representing the ideological of Öcalan, but through the, what's called the...
a party.
A party, yeah, and the same strategy. Everybody's no difference between Kurds, Turks, other nationalities, Armenians. So they went to parliament and they got their vote, and people are voted, but still they saying you have the Öcalan's ideas. That's why they put him in a jail. But the other side in the mountain, the PKKs, they supporting them. They said, if that's way it's not work, we still here, We just try to survive. Anyhow,
They're not allowing the political structure to exist, so they're resorting to other ways.
So you were talking about the Iraqi Kurds, and there is actually a regional office that they have. It's almost like what an embassy would be in Washington, D.C. I was able to visit it a couple years ago. So when you talk about the Iranian Kurds, the Iraqi Kurds, the Turkish and the Syrian, do they, having that regional representation of their own parliament and everything, do they think about all of the Kurdish people as being one region that maybe thinking ahead, maybe it could be its own country. They don't think in terms of different country or different.
Yeah, because Kurdistan has been divided. It was one nation. So when divided, since we just fighting, the Irani's part is fighting. They're asking about their right. Iraqi's part the same thing. They just keep killing and destroying and civilization.
So they're in defense mode.
Yeah, defense.
So now, an area that's able then to organize as a government with international representation and would have an interest in expanding at someday.
Yeah. That's we actually start in Rojava, in Kobani, with the YPG. They start there because it's pupils now from Iran and from Iraq and from Turkey. They all fighting together. There's no difference. They said, I'm fighting for my part or for the other part. Everybody is the same. It's actually start. Yeah, even
beginning.
Yeah, it's like a humanitarian. The peoples are going from Canada, from US, from Australia, is going to fight against ISIS.
But the interesting thing is that model, they don't care about having their own nation. That's what makes them, in my opinion, very unique. That's the Confederate democracy. They don't really care if they're a state. They just care about being peaceful and caring for the people and taking care of all of Kurdistan. I think that, again, it's kind of spins from that probably awareness that they probably won't ever get this. So they're starting kind of at a grassroots.
And I can speak more to that as well. There's got to be some superpower in the West. You can say, okay, I'm going to check out this chunk of land from all these countries and call it Kurdistan, right? So it's not going to happen in Iran. That relationship is already constrained, right, with the U.S. It's not going to happen in Iraq because there's two other groups in there, the Shia and the Sunnis, that are basically fighting for power. And the Syria is just a mess because of ISIS. And Turkey is actually a U.S. ally. Turkish lobbyists have actually put the PKK on the U.S. terrorists. So there's no way that's going to happen anytime soon. But we'll take that small chunk of
Yeah, you got to start somewhere.
One thing leading into a petition that actually my mom and I were trying to start to get at least 500,000 people to sign so that we can take the PKK off the state terrorist list. So if we can get that out and spread the word, we would love the support and the signatures for that petition to maybe spark something to get our independence paper.
All right, I think we have one more question.
In your presentation, I didn't see any signs of religion. Are there unique characteristics of Islam in Kurdistan? And does that sit easily with horizontal leadership and anarchy?
So that's one of the things that I really, really liked about Kurdistan. Everybody was like, really kind of afraid. Like, oh, you're going to have to, wear a scarf and all that stuff. No, they're very accepting. If you're Islam, if you're Christian, if you're, agnostic, it didn't really matter. It seemed like really a non-issue. Now, I think some of the problems that they have, the violence that you see against women, comes from some of that radicalized religion in the more rural communities. So that does exist, but I didn't feel it, and it didn't really emerge as something that I needed to pay a lot of attention to in the interviews and kind of discussing leadership. I think that it's created it's created problems for women that make women more passionate about leadership. So that's, I guess, where I would see Islam pop up.
There's some Islamic groups and small parties is being helped from Turkey and from Saudi Arabia with give them money, and they encourage them so they can have the Islam religions very strongly. That's the most of the societies, they against it because they know these peoples have been paid and this is not applied to our society as a Kurds.
All right, thank you guys.